The Aristotelian model of logic dominated the philosophical landscape since its first formulation around the 4th century BCE, right up until the early 20th century. Even though many developments were made throughout the millennia, the entire format simply could not distance itself from the original writings of Aristotle. In modern times, this was no different, as Kant himself said that Aristotle's development of logic was already complete, criticizing anyone's attempt to extend it further as futile. This fortunately did not stop them from trying, and the modern period saw many theoretical and practical developments in logic, which allowed it to finally abandon the shackles of its maker toward an entirely new form only a few centuries later. In this first part, we will analyze the main logical developments until Kant, and then the others right before Frege's revolution. The first important concept in modern logic was that of Pascal's wager in the early 17th century. Coming explicitly from his gambling background, it was the last major philosophical attempt to deal with a theological issue. He attempted to show that faith in the Christian God was rational by proposing the following wager, which presented in probabilistic terms within a prototypical game-theoretical framework that living a religious life is rationally better even if its religious belief turns out to be false. Two hypotheses are presented: either God exists or God does not exist, which can be exemplified in this table given different combinations of existence and belief in God, and the four outcomes, each initially with equal 25% probability. In short, an atheistic life would result in a 100% chance of misfortune if the Christian faith was true, or an overall 33.3% chance of misfortune with 66.6% chance of no consequences. Being Christian, however, would result in an overall 75% positive outcome, or 50% no consequence and 25% divine rewards, while the negative outcome would be nullified, as, according to him, it is better to live with Christian values even if there is no God. Thus, rationally, according to Pascal, a religious life would be the best bet overall. This was also the first time game theory and decision theory were proposed in philosophy. However, the argument is clearly flawed, as probabilistic thinking does not necessarily imply rational, especially when dealing with matters of faith. And as William James criticized, it could be used to defend faith in any religion promising an afterlife, including ones whose deities would be angered by those with faith in the wrong God, among several other criticisms. The first important work of logic in modern times, and perhaps even the most influential, was the Port Royal Logic, written by Antoine Arnauld and Pierre Nicole, possibly with Pascal's aid, published in 1662, the year Pascal died, with many novel interpretations of logic, but also several confusions. It presented and criticized Aristotle's ideas and other medieval developments through a Cartesian conception of strong reason, frequently citing Descartes and Aquinas, though the latter was greatly adapted to fit the theory of the former. In it, words would merely be external symbols of their originating thought, and logical rigor would only be achieved by thoroughly following the Cartesian scientific method. Simplified as 1. Conceiving, or the passive apprehension of ideas through our understanding. 2. Judging, or processing these ideas through our will. 3. Reasoning, the act of generating judgments from other judgments. And 4. Ordering, or organizing these ideas into an orderly system of knowledge. But they adhered too vehemently to the subject copula predicate, or every A is B format, which muddled their work on complex propositions, as sometimes entire subordinate clauses would be reduced to this simple format, ignoring any internal conditionals or copulas. This exaggerated simplification generates several issues which were already dealt with since the Stoics, but it was required as their logical theory also purported to fulfill Descartes' intent to support all true knowledge in existence onto its simplest truths. Overall, this work did not achieve much more than condensing previous theories with new, occasionally problematic insights. Additionally, Port Royal logic had a strong influence on great thinkers like Hume, Berkeley, and Locke, only being contested by further developments in Kantian theory. In the early idealist years, Kant developed new categorizations for what he thought was Aristotle's perfect and final logic, central to scientific development. He would call propositions in the a priori sphere analytic, as they would deal with pure reason, as would tautologies, or cyclical propositions with no new information, where the predicate is synonymous with the subject. An example of this would be all unmarried men are bachelors, which would be true even if subject and predicate would exchange places, or true regardless of the situation. The empirical or a posteriori propositions would be called synthetic, as they would refer to sensory information regarding the physical world, such as this chair is blue, which would no longer be so if someone painted it another color, or destroyed it, so that it would not be blue or a chair anymore. This dichotomy between analytic and synthetic propositions was a primary basis for what would later be called logical positivism, the dominant school of thought in early analytic philosophy. Beyond this distinction, which influenced centuries of debate in logic, another novel insight was regarding mixed propositions, or synthetic a priori, as mathematical propositions or laws of physics. For example, an operation of calculus, though being of pure reason, according to Kant, required tangible a posteriori information of real-world quantities and results of simple operations in order to reach more complex and abstract results. As to first know that 2 plus 2 equals 4, you need to have a posteriori experience, such as seeing that 2 apples with another 2 apples results in 4 apples. Thus, you could imagine absurd numbers of apples and easily calculate them without afterwards relying on counting actual apples individually, allowing for full a priori treatment. This is all part of his transcendental logic. Beyond the formal use of logic for structural analysis of reasoning, logic becomes the abstract basis of our entire understanding, as the ontological tool for the categorization of intuitions and ideas. Going back a few centuries to the early empiricist authors, Francis Bacon worked on the overlooked concept of inductive reasoning as a basis for a scientific method, as we've previously mentioned. Thoroughly critical of the syllogistic or deductive method, as per his criticism of any universality in nature, he focused on the ascending direction of knowledge construction through the induction of objective sense data, as opposed to subjective, into facts toward generalized concepts which always require further reevaluation from new information. This would become the main structure for the empiricists and overall scientific methodology from the modern era until today. Hume then developed it further while attempting to clean the concept of any metaphysical necessity latent from syllogistic thinking, as the only true connection between an observable fact and its unobservable induction would be that of custom or habit, for there is no necessary link between two causal facts. He did not deny the efficacy and utility of causation overall, focusing only on improving it in empirical fashion. This leads to Mill's interpretation that the basis for arithmetic and geometry is induction, and that all mathematical propositions are factual. Numbers and variables would be symbolic representations of the empirical world, and every calculation would be an inductive process toward new facts, and thus new knowledge. He thus completely eradicates any necessity for a priori knowledge, even in such abstract fields. This would properly align with the first attempts at approaching logic with mathematics, as it took millennia for mathematics to rise from practical shapes, stone counting, and even poems to proper numerical notations around the 17th century. The same happened to logic as well. Philosopher Ramon Llull, in the final years of the medieval period, was the first to suggest that logic could be represented in a more symbolic form, as with concentric circles, the basis of what would become set theory, a cornerstone of current logic. Hobbes would develop this intent further with his computational perspective of thought, with logical analysis like is and is not being represented as additions and subtractions in a mathematical fashion. In this way, we can properly reduce language to symbols, and ideas to complex relationships of these symbols, and thus compute everything in a logical manner, as the syllogism would then be a natural development of language. This would culminate with Leibniz's development of a more in-depth logical notation based on his profound knowledge of mathematical calculus, but nevertheless it never reached such complexity as he still used words instead of symbols for most notations. Also, unfortunately, Leibniz's writings on logic would be hidden in the archive of the Royal Library in Hanover until the early 20th century, and by this time his writings were already surpassed by Frege and others. As Aristotelian logic approached its final centuries with minimal alterations or categorizations, much like Kant had suggested, mathematical calculus and advanced notation rapidly developed elsewhere, and as the empiricist interest in logic as calculus grew, so did its approximation with mathematics in the final years, as we will see in the next tutorial, setting the stage for its overhaul in early contemporary philosophy.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel for more tutorials. Support me on Patreon so I can keep making content. And as always, feel free to email me, ProfessorDaveExplains@gmail.com.